The alarm screamed through every corridor of Station Kiris. Red emergency lights painted the metal walls in shades of blood in warning. Vornis pressed her 4 hands against the control console, watching the tactical display with growing horror. 200 enemy warships surrounded her station like wolves circling wounded prey. "How long until the shields fail?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. 48 hours, replied Vectos, the station's security chief. His reptilian scales had turned pale, a sign of stress among his people. Maybe less if they intensify the bombardment. Vornis looked around the command center. Her crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to reinforce systems that were never meant to survive a military assault. Station Kiris was a trading hub, a peaceful meeting point where dozens of species came to exchange goods and ideas. They had patrol ships for pirates, not battleships for war. The Vorten Empire had changed everything in a single morning. Their fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel without warning, ignoring all communication attempts. Within 3 hours, they had destroyed the Coalition's defense force. 30 patrol vessels reduced to floating debris. Now the Vortens were taking their time, methodically pounding the station's shields while demanding surrender. "Send another distress signal to Coalition Command," Vornis ordered. "Tell them we need immediate reinforcements." The communications officer, a young Keltian named Rivis, worked his console with trembling hands. After a moment, he looked up with defeat in his eyes. "They received the message, Administrator. The nearest Coalition fleet is still 3 weeks away. They say to hold as long as possible and evacuate who we can." 3 weeks! They had 2 days at most. Vornis felt the weight of 40,000 lives pressing down on her shoulders. Station Kiris was home to families, children, merchants, researchers. All those people trusted her to keep them safe. And she was failing. "What about civilian transports?" Vectos asked. "Can we get people out?" "The Vortens have a blockade," another officer reported. "They're allowing small ships through, but hunting down anything that tries to run. We've lost 17 vessels already. 300 people dead." Vornis closed her eyes. 300 deaths. Just the beginning if she didn't find a solution. She opened her eyes and stared at the tactical display again, searching for options that didn't exist. Then a thought occurred to her. A desperate, unlikely thought. "What about the humans?" she said quietly. The command center went silent. Every officer turned to look at her. "The humans?" Vectos repeated slowly. "Administrator, with respect, what could they possibly do? They only joined the Coalition 5 years ago. They're barely capable of interstellar travel. They have ships," Vornis argued, "and they're closer than any Coalition fleet. Their diplomatic station is only 12 hours away from here." "Diplomatic station," Vectos emphasized. "Probably guarded by a handful of patrol boats. What good would that do against 200 Vorten warships?" Vornis knew he was right. Every species in the galaxy viewed humans as newcomers, almost primitive compared to civilizations that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Earth had only discovered faster-than-light technology a decade ago. Their contribution to the Coalition had been minimal trade agreements, cultural exchanges, scientific cooperation. Nothing military. But they were the only option she had. "Send the message anyway," Vornis commanded. "Request any available ships. Even if they can only buy us a few hours, that's a few thousand more lives we can evacuate." Rivis nodded and composed the message. His fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, encoding the desperate plea for help. When he finished, he looked to Vornis for approval. She read the message one final time. "To Earth Diplomatic Station. Station Kiris under attack by Vorten Empire fleet. Coalition reinforcements 3 weeks away. Requesting immediate assistance. Any available vessels. 40,000 civilians at risk. Please respond. Short, direct, honest. She authorized the transmission. The message fired through subspace at speeds that bent physics itself, crossing the distance to human space in seconds. Now all they could do was wait and hope that someone on the other end would care enough to respond. 12 light-years away, the message arrived at Earth's diplomatic station orbiting a small moon. The facility looked modest from outside, a rotating cylinder with docking ports and sensor arrays. Nothing impressive compared to the massive stations of older species. Inside, Admiral Dehai sat in his office reviewing supply reports when his console chimed with an urgent priority message. He opened it immediately, his experienced eyes scanning the text with practiced efficiency. His expression didn't change as he read, but his jaw tightened slightly. "Captain Yunji," he said calmly into his communicator. "Please come to my office. We have a situation." Within 2 minutes, Captain Unji entered the room. She was young for her rank, but she had earned her position through brilliance in tactical planning. Her sharp eyes caught the tension in the Admiral's posture immediately. "What is it, sir?" Dehine turned his console screen toward her. "Station Kiris is under attack. 200 Vorten warships. They're requesting any available ships we can send." Yunji read the message quickly. Her expression remained professional, but Dehine saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was already planning fleet movements, running scenarios, estimating response times. "Any available ships," she repeated softly. "They're expecting us to send whatever we have nearby. A token force. Maybe a dozen vessels. That's what anyone would expect from humanity," Dehine agreed. "We're the newcomers. The primitive species that barely learned to fold space. No one expects much from us." A slight smile touched Yunji's lips. "Should we correct that assumption, sir?" Dehine stood and walked to the window overlooking the lunar surface below. In the distance, he could see the lights of the shipyard facilities buried in the craters. Construction yards that had been operating at full capacity for years. Building vessels that most of the galaxy knew nothing about. "Contact Fleet Command on Earth," he said quietly. "Activate Protocol Sparta. I want 3rd Expeditionary Fleet ready to deploy within 12 hours. Full battle configuration." Yunji's smile widened. "Yes, sir." They asked for any available ships. "Should we tell them what's coming?" "Send a brief response. Tell them aid is en route. Tell them to hold their position and not surrender. Don't give specifics." "They're going to be surprised," Umji observed. "Yes," Dehine agreed, turning back from the window. "The Vortens are going to be even more surprised." As Yunji left to begin coordinating the fleet deployment, Dehine looked back at the message from Station Kiris. He thought about Administrator Vornis, desperately sending out a call for help to a species she probably considered barely capable of helping. He thought about the 40,000 innocent people whose lives hung in the balance. The galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity. They prepared for the worst and hoped for the best. And when someone asked for help, they answered with everything they had. Dehine sat back down at his console and began composing his orders. Station Kiris had asked for aid. They were about to receive a lesson in what humanity considered an appropriate response. Commander Dex stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. The station's shields were weakening exactly as predicted. Another day of bombardment, and they would collapse completely. Then Station Kiris would surrender or be destroyed. Either outcome was acceptable. "Commander," his communications officer called out. "We've intercepted a distress signal from the station. They're requesting help from the humans." Dex turned, his triple eyes blinking in amusement. "The humans?" "They're calling the humans for military assistance." Laughter rippled through the bridge crew. The idea of humans mounting any kind of rescue operation was absurd. Everyone in the Vorten fleet had seen the intelligence reports on Earth, a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last decade. A civilization that had spent most of its history fighting itself instead of exploring the stars. What does our intelligence say about human military capabilities? Dex asked, still smiling. The intelligence officer pulled up the relevant files on his console. Earth is approximately 50 patrol vessels spread across their local systems. Mostly scouts and light frigates for protecting trade routes. Nothing that could stand against our fleet. Our analysts estimate they could maybe assemble 15 ships within a reasonable time frame. 15 ships, Dex repeated, his amusement growing. Against our 200. This is what desperation looks like. Continue the bombardment schedule. When these human ships arrive, we'll destroy them as a lesson about interfering in Vorten operations. Back on Station Kiris, Vornis gathered her senior staff in the command center. The mood was grim. They had been evacuating civilians for hours, but the Vorten blockade made every departure dangerous. Small ships could slip through occasionally, but larger transports were being targeted and destroyed. How many have we evacuated so far? Vornis asked. 8,000, replied the evacuation coordinator. But we're running out of ships. Most of the civilian transports fled in the first hours of the attack. What remains are cargo haulers and personal vessels. Small capacity, slow speeds. 32,000 people still aboard, Vecto said quietly. We need more time. The humans responded to our distress call, Vornis announced. The room fell silent. Then Vecto spoke carefully, his tone respectful but skeptical. Administrator, I mean no disrespect to the humans, but what can they realistically do? They're a young species. Limited military experience. Even if they send every ship they have, it won't be enough to break the Vorten blockade. I know, Vornis admitted. But even a small force might distract the Vortens long enough for us to evacuate more people. If the humans can draw away some of their ships, create confusion in their formation, we might save thousands more lives. The station's tactical officer, a crystalline being named Shora, projected a hologram of the system. If human ships arrive from this vector, they could potentially engage the Vorten outer perimeter here. That might create a gap in the blockade for 30 to 40 minutes. Enough time to push through our largest transports. At the cost of those human ships, Vectos observed grimly. They'll be destroyed. Whoever comes to help us is coming to die. Vornis felt the weight of that reality. She was asking humans to sacrifice themselves for people they barely knew. Species they had only been allied with for 5 years. It wasn't fair. But nothing about this situation was fair. Send a message to all remaining transports, she ordered. Tell them to prepare for immediate departure when I give the signal. When the humans arrive, we make our move. Far from the battle, deep in Earth's orbital space, Admiral Daehyun stood in the command center of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet's headquarters. The room buzzed with controlled activity as officers coordinated the largest military deployment in human history. Fleet status? Daehyun asked. Commander Sojin looked up from her console. All vessels responding. We have 500 warships ready for deployment. Another 300 support vessels standing by. Total fleet strength, 800 ships. Lieutenant Hyam Wu, managing logistics from his station, added more details. Carriers are launching their fighter wings now. Battleships have completed weapons checks. Destroyer screens are in formation. Supply ships are loaded and ready. We can jump in 12 hours as scheduled. Daehyun nodded, watching the holographic display that showed every ship in the fleet. Each dot of light represented hundreds of crew members, thousands of tons of metal and weapons, the culmination of decades of preparation. Earth had been building this fleet quietly, steadily, while the galaxy assumed they were harmless newcomers. "Captain Junji," he said, "have you calculated our jump coordinates?" Junji stepped forward, projecting her calculations onto the main display. "We'll arrive at the system's edge here, far enough from the Vorten fleet to deploy without immediate engagement, close enough to reach Station Kiris quickly. Jump time to target, 14 hours. And our response to Station Kiris? Sent, sir. I kept it brief, as you ordered. Just confirmed that aid is en route and instructed them to maintain their defensive position." Daehyun studied the star map, visualizing how the battle would unfold. The Vortons would be expecting a small human force, maybe a handful of ships. Instead, they would face 500 warships, supported by carriers, supplied by the most advanced logistics network humanity had ever created. "One more thing," Daehyun said. "Make sure our medical ships are included in the deployment. We'll have prisoners to care for after this is over." The statement drew quick glances from his officers. Not if they won. After. Daehyun spoke with the certainty of someone who had already decided the outcome. Back on Station Kiris, the hours crawled past. Vornis barely slept, spending her time coordinating evacuations and monitoring the Vorten fleet's movements. The enemy was patient, content to slowly grind down their shields while occasionally destroying an escaping transport to terrorize the population. 14 hours after sending the distress call, Rivis looked up from his console with surprise. "Administrator, I'm detecting unusual readings at the system's edge." "What kind of readings?" Vornis moved to his station. "Jump signatures. Multiple vessels entering the system." Vectos joined them, his scales darkening with tension. "The humans. They actually came. How many ships?" Rivis worked his sensors, trying to filter through the interference. His fingers froze on the controls. His eyes widened. "Administrator, this can't be right. What is it?" "The sensors are showing hundreds of signatures. Hundreds. But that's impossible." That would mean the main display updated, showing the system's edge. Space itself seemed to tear open as vessel after vessel emerged from faster-than-light travel. They kept coming, one after another, filling the tactical display with new contacts. Vornis stared in disbelief. She had asked for help. She had hoped for a dozen ships, maybe 20 if the humans were generous. What she was seeing was impossible. "Final count," Rivis whispered. 500 warships. 300 support vessels. Total fleet strength, 800 human ships. The command center fell silent. Every officer stared at the display, trying to process what they were seeing. The human fleet dwarfed the Vorten force. It wasn't the rescue mission. It was an invasion force. "They sent everything," Vectos said quietly. "We asked for help and they sent their entire navy." But that wasn't quite right. And somewhere in the back of Vornis's mind, a terrifying thought began to form. If this was what humanity considered an appropriate response to a distress call, how many more ships did they have back home? Commander Dex was reviewing casualty reports from his latest attack on an escaping transport when his sensor officer suddenly stood up from his station. "Commander, we have multiple jump signatures at the system's edge." Dex barely looked up. "The coalition reinforcements? They're 3 weeks early and too late to matter." "How many ships?" "Sir, the count is still increasing. I'm reading 50, 70, 100 contacts." Now Dex paid attention. 100 ships? That's impossible. The nearest coalition fleet couldn't mobilize that quickly. "Still counting, sir." 150. 200. The sensor officer's voice rose with each number. 250. 300. "Commander, they're still coming through." Dex moved to the sensor display, shoving his officer aside. The screen showed an impossible sight. Space at the system's edge was filled with new contacts, each one representing a ship dropping out of faster-than-light travel. They appeared in perfect formation, organized into neat tactical groups. Final count, 800 vessels, the sensor officer reported, his voice shaking. 500 warships, 300 support ships. They're broadcasting Earth identification codes. The bridge went silent. 800 ships. From Earth, the species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. The civilization that barely knew how to travel between stars. There must be a mistake, Dex said, but his voice lacked conviction. Check the sensors again. These readings have to be false. Already done, sir. Readings confirmed. The fleet is real. They're maintaining position at the system's edge. No aggressive movement yet. Dex stared at the display, his mind racing. His intelligence reports had said Earth possessed maybe 50 ships total. Where had 800 vessels come from? How long had humanity been building this fleet? And why had no one noticed? On Station Kiris, the command center had erupted in controlled chaos. Officers were frantically analyzing the human fleet, trying to understand what they were seeing. They're organized into battle groups, Shora reported, her crystalline body pulsing with excitement. I count 30 carrier groups, 50 destroyer squadrons, 20 battleship formations. This isn't a random collection of vessels. This is a professional military fleet. Vornis couldn't stop staring at the tactical display. Each small icon represented a human warship. Together, they formed a wall of force that made the Vorten fleet look small by comparison. Administrator, we're receiving a transmission, Rives announced. It's from a human flagship. Audio and visual. They're broadcasting on open channels. Put it through, Vornis ordered. The main screen flickered and changed. A human appeared, wearing a dark military uniform with silver insignia. His face was calm, his eyes intelligent and hard. He looked like someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult decisions. This is Admiral Dahine of the Earth Defense Navy, the human said in perfect galactic common. Vorten vessels, you are in violation of Coalition space. You have attacked a peaceful station and murdered innocent civilians. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. You have 10 minutes to decide. The transmission ended. Silence filled the command center. Then Vectos started laughing, a deep sound that echoed off the metal walls. He gave them 10 minutes, the security chief said. 10 minutes to face 800 ships. I think I'm starting to like humans. But Vornis felt a chill run through her body. Admiral Dahine's voice had been calm, almost gentle, but his eyes had promised violence if his offer was refused. This was not a man who bluffed. On the Vorten flagship, Dex struggled to maintain his composure. His officers were looking to him for orders, for some way out of this impossible situation. Pride warred with survival instinct in his mind. Send a response, he commanded. Tell them they're bluffing. Tell them humanity lacks the resources to maintain such a fleet. Tell them, Commander, his tactical officer interrupted. The human fleet is moving. Just one ship. It's advancing toward our position. Dex watched as a single vessel broke formation and moved forward. The sensors identified it as a carrier, larger than any ship in his fleet. It stopped at what would normally be considered extreme weapons range. They're launching fighters, the tactical officer reported. Small craft poured from the carrier's hangar base like angry insects. 30 fighters moving in perfect formation. They accelerated at speeds that made Dex's own fighters look slow by comparison. Within seconds, they had closed half the distance to his fleet. Then they scattered, each fighter taking a different vector. They wove through space in patterns that seemed to defy physics-tight turns at high speed. Sudden accelerations, maneuvers that would crush a pilot under gravity forces. And as they moved, they were painting every single one of his capital ships with targeting lasers. They have weapons lock, his defensive coordinator said quietly. All 30 fighters have locked onto our battleships simultaneously. And that was one carrier. Sir, the humans have 37 carriers in their fleet. A new transmission came through. Admiral Dahyon's face appeared again on the screen. His expression hadn't changed. That was a demonstration, the Admiral said. One carrier, 30 fighters. 9 minutes remaining. The transmission ended. Dex stood frozen, watching those 30 human fighters continue their dance through space around his fleet. They were showing him what they could do, showing him that his ships were helpless against their technology, showing him that this battle was already over. Commander? His second officer asked quietly. Your orders? Dex should have ordered a retreat. Any reasonable commander would have withdrawn immediately, reported this impossible fleet to the Vorten Empire, lived to fight another day. But pride is a powerful poison. He had 200 ships. He had spent his entire career preparing for battle. He couldn't retreat without even trying. All ships to battle stations, Dex ordered. Prepare to engage. We'll show these humans that the Vorten Empire does not flee from threats. His bridge crew stared at him with expressions that ranged from shock to terror. But they were military. They obeyed orders. They began preparing for battle. On the human flagship, Captain Yunji watched the Vorten fleet activate their weapon systems. She shook her head slowly. They're really going to fight, she said to Admiral Dahyon. I didn't think they'd be that foolish. Pride makes people do stupid things, Dahyon replied. Signal all ships. Weapons free. Rules of engagement. Disable. Don't destroy. We want prisoners to question and survivors to spread the word about what happened here. Yes, sir. Dahyon leaned back in his command chair and watched the countdown timer. 3 minutes remaining of the 10 minutes he had given the Vortens. They had made their choice. Now they would learn what that choice cost. Captain Yunji, he said quietly. When the timer reaches 0, you may begin. Yes, Admiral. On Station Kiris, Vornis watched both fleets preparing for battle. The human vessels remained in their perfect formations, patient and professional. The Vorten ships were scrambling, trying to organize a response to a threat they had never anticipated. This is going to be quick, Vectos observed. Vornis nodded. She had seen enough battles to recognize the signs. The Vortens were already beaten. They just didn't know it yet. The human fleet wasn't just larger. It was better organized, better equipped, and better trained. This wouldn't be a battle. It would be a lesson. The countdown timer reached 0. Admiral Dahyon said one word. Begin. And 800 human ships moved forward as one. The human fleet didn't charge forward like warriors seeking glory. They advanced in formation, maintaining precise distances between ships, moving with the coordination of a single organism. From Station Kiris, it looked like watching a storm approach, inevitable, unstoppable, terrifying in its organization. All ships, open fire, Admiral Dahyon ordered calmly. The first wave wasn't even visible to the naked eye. Missiles launched from hundreds of ships simultaneously, smart munitions that calculated their own trajectories and adjusted for defensive fire. They crossed the void between the two fleets in seconds, splitting into smaller warheads that overwhelmed the Vorten point defense systems. Commander Dex watched on his display as 15 of his destroyers simply vanished from the tactical map, their hulls torn apart by impacts they never saw coming. The entire engagement had lasted 90 seconds. Return fire, he shouted. All ships, target their lead vessels and fire everything. The Vorten fleet responded with their own barrage. Missiles and energy weapons lit up the space between the two forces. It was an impressive display of firepower that would have destroyed any normal fleet. But the human ships weren't normal. Their shields are absorbing everything. Dex's tactical officer reported in disbelief. We're hitting them with enough firepower to level a city, and their shields aren't even close to failing. Captain Junji stood on the bridge of the carrier Soul's Hammer, watching the Vorten weapons splash harmlessly against their defensive screens. "Launch all fighters," she commanded. "Target their engines and weapon systems. Disable, don't destroy." 300 fighters poured from the human carriers, joining the 30 already in space. They swept toward the Vorten fleet like a wave of metal and fury. Their weapons were precise, surgical. They targeted engine pods, weapons batteries, sensor arrays. Within minutes, 20 Vorten ships were drifting dead in space, their crews alive but helpless. On the human flagship, Lieutenant Hyunwoo coordinated the destroyer squadrons. He watched the battle unfold on multiple displays simultaneously, adjusting formations in real time based on Vorten movements. "Enemy cruisers attempting to flank our left wing," he reported. "Commander So-jin, adjust screen 3 to compensate," Admiral Daehyun ordered. So-jin worked her tactical console with practiced efficiency. Destroyers moving to intercept. Overlapping fire arcs established. Firing. The human destroyers moved as one, creating a wall of defensive fire that shredded the Vorten flanking attempt before it could develop. 8 more enemy ships went dark, their systems destroyed by the coordinated barrage. On Station Kiris, a young human technician named Ji Woo worked alongside Kelthian engineers to restore the station's damaged systems. She had been stranded on the station when the attack began, one of only 30 humans aboard. Now she watched her species fleet through the observation windows, feeling pride and sadness in equal measure. "How did you build all those ships?" one of the Kelthian engineers asked her. "We've been monitoring your space industry. We never saw construction on this scale." Ji Woo smiled sadly. "You saw what you expected to see. You assumed we were primitive, so you stopped looking closely. We've been building in the asteroid belt, on the dark side of moons, in orbital facilities that looked like commercial shipyards. We didn't hide it. We just didn't advertise it either. But why? Why build such a massive fleet?" "Because we remembered our own history," Ji Woo said quietly. "We remembered what it was like when we were divided, when we fought each other over scraps of land and resources. Then we looked at the galaxy and saw thousands of species, some peaceful, some not. We decided we would never be weak again, never be helpless, never be victims." Back in the battle, Commander Dex realized with growing horror that his fleet was being systematically dismantled. The humans weren't fighting with rage or excitement. They fought with cold precision, like surgeons removing a tumor. Every shot had a purpose. Every maneuver was calculated. "We need to retreat," his second officer urged. "Commander, we've lost 50 ships already. If we don't withdraw now, we'll lose everything." But Dex's pride still held him. "No, order the fleet to concentrate fire on their flagship. If we can kill their admiral, maybe we can break their coordination." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all he had left. 60 Vorten ships turned their weapons on the human flagship, Indomitable, pouring everything they had into one concentrated assault. On the Indomitable, Admiral Daehyun watched the enemy fire converge on his position. He didn't even flinch. "Shields holding at 80%, reported the defensive coordinator. "No significant damage." Daehyun allowed himself a small smile. "Return fire." Full broadside. The Indomitable was a battleship, the largest class of vessel in the human fleet. When it fired its full weapons complement, the effect was devastating. 20 Vorten ships that had concentrated their attack suddenly found themselves targeted by weapons that hit harder than anything they had ever faced. Their shields collapsed like paper in a fire. Their hulls buckled and tore. Enemy formation breaking apart. Sojin reported. They're scattering, but there was nowhere to scatter to. The human fleet had them surrounded, contained. Every avenue of escape was blocked by ships that moved faster and hit harder than anything the Vortons possessed. Commander Sojin directed a special operation from her console. Stealth frigates execute flanking maneuver beta. Dex never saw them coming. 20 human frigates, running silent with advanced stealth technology, appeared behind his formation. They had been there the entire time, invisible to his sensors, waiting for the perfect moment. Now they struck, targeting command modules and communication arrays. 30 more Vorton ships went silent. Their command crews dazed or unconscious from precision strikes, their vessels intact but helpless. On his bridge, Commander Dex finally understood. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. The humans were showing the entire galaxy what they could do. They were sending a message written in disabled ships and shattered pride. How many ships have we lost? He asked quietly. 89 destroyed or disabled, his tactical officer reported. 42 more with significant damage. Commander, we can't win this. We couldn't win this if we had 500 ships instead of 200. Dex looked around his bridge. His crew was exhausted, terrified, defeated. He had led them here with pride and arrogance. Now he had to save whoever was left. Send surrender codes to the human fleet, he ordered, his voice breaking. All ships, stand down. Cease fire. The order spread through what remained of his fleet. One by one, Vorton ships powered down their weapons and shields, the universal signal of surrender. On the Indomitable, Admiral Daehyun received the surrender with professional courtesy. All ships, cease fire. Medical vessels, move forward and provide assistance to damaged Vorton ships. Survivors will be treated according to coalition law. The battle had lasted 20 minutes. In that time, the human fleet had completely destroyed the Vorton assault force with minimal effort. Human casualties. 47 personnel injured from a few weapons impacts that penetrated shields. 0 deaths. Vorton casualties. 89 ships destroyed or disabled. 4,200 personnel dead or wounded. From Station Kiris, Vornis watched in stunned silence as human medical ships moved among the wreckage, searching for survivors, providing aid even to those who had been enemies moments before. They're helping them, Vecto said in wonder. After everything the Vortons did, the humans are saving their lives. Ji Woo, the human technician, spoke softly. That's who we are. We fight when we have to. We kill when there's no other choice. But we don't stop being human. We don't stop caring about life. Even enemy life. On the Indomitable, Admiral Daehyun watched his medical team's work. Around him, his bridge crew was already compiling battle reports, analyzing what went right and what could be improved. Sir, Captain Yoonji said, coalition reinforcements are still 2.5 weeks away. Should we maintain position until they arrive? Yes, and prepare a full report for Coalition Command. They're going to have many questions about what happened here today. Daehyun knew that this battle would change everything. The galaxy had seen Earth as weak. Now they had seen the truth. The question was what they would do with that knowledge. The news spread through Coalition space faster than light itself. Within hours, every species knew what had happened at Station Kiris. Humanity, the newcomers everyone had dismissed, had deployed 800 warships and destroyed a major military power in 20 minutes. On Earth, Ambassador Mincio sat in her office preparing for what she knew would be an uncomfortable conversation. Her console showed dozens of incoming communication requests from coalition ambassadors, military leaders, council members. They all wanted the same thing, answers. She accepted the first call. A Kelthian admiral appeared on the screen, his 4 arms gesturing frantically. Ambassador, How long has Earth possessed this fleet? Why was this capability never disclosed to Coalition Command? Minseo kept her voice calm and professional. Admiral, every detail about our military was disclosed according to Coalition Charter. You have our fleet manifests. You have our shipyard locations. You have our military budget reports. The information was always available in the Coalition database. But nobody knew you had 800 warships. Nobody asked, Minseo replied simply. You made assumptions based on our age as a spacefaring species. You decided what we were capable of without actually investigating. That's not our failure. It's yours. The Admiral sputtered, trying to form a response, but Minseo had already moved to the next call. This was going to be a long day. At Coalition headquarters, a massive station orbiting a neutron star, the Council convened an emergency session. Vornis stood before them, giving testimony about the battle. She described the human fleet's arrival, their overwhelming force, their precision and discipline. They gave Commander Thex 10 minutes to surrender before firing a single shot, she explained. When he refused, they disabled his fleet with minimal casualties. Then they sent medical ships to save Vorten lives. This wasn't a military action driven by revenge or anger. It was a professional operation conducted with care and restraint. One of the Council elders, a being whose species had been traveling the stars for 10,000 years, leaned forward. Administrator Vornis, in your opinion, was the fleet deployed to station Kiris Earth's full military capability? Vornis paused, remembering Admiral Dehayan's calm face, the way he had spoken with absolute certainty. No, Council Elder. I believe what we saw was a fraction of what humanity possesses. Admiral Dehayan called it Third Expeditionary Fleet. That implies there are at least 2 more fleets of similar size. Murmurs spread through the council chamber. If humanity had 3 fleets like that, they were one of the strongest military powers in the galaxy. And they had joined the Coalition as friends, never mentioning their strength. Why didn't they tell us? Another council member asked. Perhaps, Vornis said carefully, they were waiting to see if they needed to. In a separate chamber, Admiral Dehayan met with Coalition military leaders. They were professional soldiers, and they recognized efficiency when they saw it. A Kelfian admiral asked the question they were all thinking. How many ships does Earth actually have, Admiral? Dehayan considered his answer. He could be diplomatic, evasive, political. Or he could be honest and let them understand what humanity had become. Enough, he said simply. And we're building more every month. We've looked at the galaxy, seen what exists out here. We've learned about the Vorten Empire and a dozen other aggressive species. We've studied the wars that have been fought. And we made a decision. We'll never be defenseless. We'll never be weak. We'll never be victims. A reptilian general shifted uncomfortably. You're preparing for war. We're preparing for peace, Dehayan corrected. We've seen what happens when peaceful species can't defend themselves. They die. They're conquered. They're enslaved. We choose a different path. We maintain strength so overwhelming that no one will dare attack us or our allies. And what about the Vortens? Asked another admiral. What happens to Commander Thex and his survivors? Dehayan's expression softened slightly. They face Coalition justice. But I've requested leniency. Commander, Thex made a mistake. He tested our resolve and learned a hard lesson. Now he and his crew can serve as witnesses to what happened here. Sometimes mercy demonstrates strength more effectively than execution. Meanwhile, Commander Thex sat in a holding cell aboard a Coalition security ship. He was alive, relatively unharmed despite the battle. Human medical teams had treated his injuries with care. They had even provided grief counselors for his crew members who lost friends in the fighting. It made his defeat worse somehow. If the humans had been cruel or vindictive, he could have nursed his hatred, blamed them for his failure. But they had been professional, even compassionate. They had shown him respect he didn't deserve. A human officer came to his cell. It was Captain Yunji from the carrier Soul's Hammer. She sat down across from him, her expression neutral. "Why?" Vex asked. "Why did you send 800 ships? We were attacking one station. You could have driven us off with 50 vessels. Could we?" Yunji asked. "Maybe, but then what? You would have retreated, regrouped, come back stronger. Other aggressive species would have seen that humanity responds to threats with minimal force. They would have tested us again and again. No, Commander. We sent 800 ships to send a message. We sent overwhelming force so that every species in the galaxy would understand. If you threaten humanity or our allies, the response will be absolute." Vex looked at the young human officer and saw the cold calculation behind her words. Humanity didn't fight battles. They solved problems, permanently. Back on Station Kiris, life slowly returned to normal. The Vorten blockade was gone, replaced by human patrol ships that protected the station while repairs were made. Ji Wu worked alongside her Kelthian colleagues, restoring damaged systems. "I still don't understand," one of them said. "You're a civilian, a technician. You're not military, but you knew about the fleet." Ji Wu smiled. "Every human knew. We don't hide things from our own people. Our children grow up visiting the shipyards. Our schools teach military history and strategy. Our civilians support the fleet because they understand why it exists. You're a warrior species." "No," Ji Wu corrected gently. "We're a survivor species. There's a difference. Warriors seek conflict. Survivors prepare for it and hope it never comes." That evening, Vornis held a celebration on the station's main observation deck. She had invited the human personnel who had helped during the crisis, including Ji Wu and several officers from the fleet. As she stood at the railing, watching the human ships orbit the station in perfect formation, Admiral Daehan joined her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for coming, for saving us, for showing restraint even when you had overwhelming power." "You're welcome," Daehan replied. "But understand, Administrator, we didn't come here just to save Station Kiris. We came to make a statement. The galaxy has been looking at humanity the wrong way, seeing us as weak because we're young. Now they know the truth. Some will fear you for it," Vornis observed. "Fear is honest," Daehan said. "It's better than contempt or dismissal. Species that fear us will think twice before attacking. Species that respect us will see us as worthy allies. Either outcome serves our purposes." "And what are your purposes?" Daehan was quiet for a moment, watching his ships patrol the system. "To survive, to thrive, to protect those who can't protect themselves, to build something lasting in a dangerous galaxy. We came to the stars late, Administrator, but we came prepared." Weeks later, back on Earth, Lieutenant Tae Yang returned home to visit his family. He was a fighter pilot, had scored 3 kills during the battle at Station Kiris. His younger sister asked him what it was like, fighting in the fleet. "It was scary," he admitted, "and sad. We destroyed a lot of ships, killed a lot of people. I don't feel proud of that." "But you saved the station," his sister said. "Yes, we saved 40,000 innocent people. That's what I focus on. That's why we have the fleet. Not to conquer or dominate. To protect. To help. To make sure that when someone calls for aid, we can answer." His sister thought about that. "Will you fight again?" "Maybe," Taeyang said. "I hope not. But if I do, I'll remember what Captain Yunji told us after the battle. She said that strength means nothing if you don't use it for something worth protecting. We protected people who needed help. That's worth any battle." On Station Kiris, a young Kelthian child stood with her mother on the observation deck. watching the human fleet prepare to depart. Most of the ships were returning to Earth, leaving only a small garrison force to protect the station until coalition reinforcements arrived. "Will the humans come back if we need help again?" the child asked. Her mother looked at the massive battleships hanging in space, remembered the calm voice of Admiral Dehayan, thought about the 800 ships that had appeared when only a dozen were expected. "Yes," she said with certainty. "I think they always will." The human fleet jumped back to Earth in perfect formation, leaving behind a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed. Humanity was no longer the naive newcomer. They were a force to be reckoned with, a species that prepared for the worst while hoping for the best, a civilization that answered calls for help with overwhelming force and unexpected compassion. They had expected human aid, a token gesture, a symbolic response.